Hello everyone and welcome to Game 8 of the 2018 World Chess Championship match between Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano Caruana. What everyone was hoping to see today was some crazy refutation of the Rosolimo-Nejmedinov attack. Whether we will see that or not, we're just gonna have to wait and see. Fabiano has the white pieces and we're gonna dive straight into the game. But as usual, we do have some very interesting photos, compliments of Niki Riga once again. So let's check it out, and also we will use the first one as a photo challenge. Surely you know the gentleman who makes the first move for Fabi, but just in case some of you are perhaps new to the channel or to the chess world, it will come as a very nice exercise. So who is the gentleman making the first move for Fabi? Not maybe a year ago, but some 6 to 8 months ago, we have enjoyed some very nice game by the self-learning AI AlphaZero, and he definitely had something to do with it. So there's a little bit of a hint for you. Also, we have a very nice hand check between Carlsen and Caruana before the start of the game. Chief Arbiter Lothar Schmidt again towering over them. And here we have a very nice photo of Carlsen making his first move as black, and yes, it will be again a Sicilian. And since this is the fourth Sicilian we see, this is game 8, and in every game Caruana played e4, every game Carlsen defended with c5, so the Sicilian defense. I thought it might be a bit funny if he first went c6 and then only proceed to c5. Like the little joke Tal played against the young Fischer, as you know, Caruana is an American challenger. But you know, it's the World Chess Championship match, maybe not the greatest time for jokes. But you know, in case he will repeat it in game 10, you know, maybe just a little nudge to c6 and then c5. Who knows? Might be very nice. And also here we have also an excellent photo. You can see the sharp red color of Carlsen's socks that goes very nicely with the Norwegian flag on the left. There you have it. Caruana not seeming all that interested in taking a photo. But okay, enough with the photos. Let's dive straight into the game. Like we said, we have e4, c5. Carlsen goes for the Sicilian. Knight to f3, knight to c6, and here, well, we've already seen 3 Rosolimos with bishop to b5. Here Caruana actually goes for the main d4, the open Sicilian. And everyone was very happy when they saw this. We didn't know will we see a knight or will we see some crazy line. So let's see what they played. C captures on d4, knight captures on d4, and now comes knight to f6, knight to c3, and now e5, the Lasker variation. Knight to b5, and here the most games available in the database continue with a6. This would be the main line. Not the main line, but not something that you want to play as black, because here knight to d6 is definitely a possibility, and here black would have to part with his bishop pair. So here, even if you exchange everything, it's hard to say if white actually has something, but the bishop pair will certainly be a great advantage in such an open game. So we have d6, this is the main line, and now comes knight to d5. Also possible is bishop to g5, a move that is very frequently played, and then after a6, knight to a3, b5, also a favorite a line amongst those who play the Lasker variation. So after d6 we have knight to d5, now threatening, of course, knight to c7 check. This pawn is not free for grabs. If you capture it, then you are quickly getting checkmated. Knight bc7 check after you move the king, or you can give up your queen, but doesn't really matter. Queen g4 check, f5, queen captures on f5, this will be checkmate. Of course, nothing like this is likely to happen in a World Chess Championship match, so knight captures on d5. And here we have pawn captures, attacking the knight, and now comes knight to b8. This is still all standard theory of this opening, and here c4 is a move that can be found in a lot of games in the database, but what Caruana and his team prepared for this game is actually a4. A much less played move in this variation, but still amongst the engine's favorites. Bishop to e7, Carlsen is preparing to castle. We have bishop to e2, Carlsen castles, Caruana castles, and now comes knight to d7. We have bishop to d2, and this seems like a very a very passive setup for white, but it's actually pretty great, as you'll see. The bishop defends the a5 square. Caruana will want to push this pawn to a5, so when Carlsen finally dislodges the knight from b5, the knight can actually go to a3, and the bishop will defend the pawn that will be on a5. So f5 here by Carlsen, and this is not a new move in the position, but a very rare move. Here, Grigory Oparin had this position in 2017 against Boris Gelfand, and in this position, Gelfand was known to play knight to f6. In that game, he drew his game against Oparin. In one game, he tried a6, but those were both rapid games. And in the game he played a6, Oparin actually beat Boris Gelfand, but here Carlsen goes for f5, a very nice expansion. And Caruana proceeds simply with his plan a5. And there is one game available in the database where knight to f6 was played that ended in a draw, but here we have a6, and this is now completely a new game, already on move 13, that was never played before. Knight to a3 as planned. Now the queen cannot capture, as Caruana's bishop is guarding the a5 pawn. And we have e4 by Carlsen, grabbing even more space in the center and making room for this knight to be able to come to e5. Knight to c4 by Caruana, a very nice square for the knight, controlling very important central squares, but also preparing to jump to b6. This is very important, and one of the reasons the pawn needed to come to a5. Knight to e5, and now comes knight to b6. Also, if you capture here, then d captures, and black's pawn mass in the center will be simply too powerful if c4, f4 is coming, and black will just have a very enjoyable game. But here Caruana goes for knight to b6, attacking Carlsen's rook on a8, and Carlsen moves it. There's really no other move. Rook to b8 was played, but I did try to make a little joke on Twitter. I said that f4 would have been a very interesting move, but it might be an interesting move if white actually captures the rook immediately. Then with f3, you could perhaps have an interesting game. Of course, not in a serious competition, but here after white goes back, bishop g4, pawn captures, and after bishop to d3, queen to e8. And now it would be very hard for black in a practical game to actually prevent such nasty threats here. Let's say king h1, you want to get the rook back over to g1, after bishop to h3, rook g1, queen h5, and it would be a very tough position for white to hold. You know, in top competition, I believe black would be able to prevail here. Problem is, after f4, white can simply capture the pawn, and I mean, after rook captures, now capture the knight, and now there is no attack, and you just gave up, well, you didn't give up a rook, but you gave up an exchange, and white will simply be much better. But still, you know, an interesting idea. So, after knight to b6, rook to b8, Carlsen, of course, doesn't want to part with his rook. We have f4, attacking the knight on e5, as that's a very strong square. Of course, you don't want to move the knight. We have e captures on f3 en passant. Bishop captures on f3, and here Carlsen spent a lot of time. There was discussion about playing f4 here, simply making the room for this bishop to come to f5, as you don't want this tension to always be present here. You do want to develop this bishop and somehow get this rook into the game. As long as the knight is on b6, this rook really isn't going anywhere. But here, after some 13 minutes of thinking, Carlsen played g5. A very nice move, and it seems like a very committal move. So now you will either start attacking and win the game, or you will pretty much suffer for the rest of the game. And it's very interesting that after Carlsen played g5, Caruana simply blitzed out c4, which is very tough to deal with. If you play such a committal move, you want your opponent, you know, to take it very hard psychologically. You want him to spend time, you know, decide, oh, can I play c4 if he pushes g4, and you know, things like that. But here Caruana simply played c4, and I imagine Carlsen was very upset by this, because now if g4 is played, Caruana obviously came prepared and prepared c4 in home analysis, because now if g4, bishop to e2, okay, bishop g5, you want to get the queen into the game and perhaps start pushing your pawns. Bishop captures, queen captures, but now you have queen to c1. You offer a queen trade, and black can't really offer a queen trade. So after f4, c5, you still can't push f3 because the queen is unguarded on g5. Queen to f6, and now c6. Captures, and now this pawn will be very strong. If f3, you can simply capture it, or perhaps bishop c4 first. Knight captures, queen captures with check, and after bishop to e6, you will move back the queen. But now black has no way of actually pushing anything or capturing anything, and white's c pawn is simply a monster. Obviously, and this is one of the best lines there exists for white. All the other lines are simply much better for white. So Caruana definitely came prepared with the c4 move, and Carlsen was forced to play f4. Making room for his bishop to come to f5, we have bishop to c3 here, and this bishop to c3 move is the first move most likely that Caruana made over the board, as it took him some 10 minutes to make this move. Perhaps it was still, you know, a glimpse of home preparation, but he just wanted to not perhaps blitz it out, or for some reason he spent some time on it, but it was actually his first thinking move. If you go for something like bishop to e4 with ideas of queen to h5, then black can immediately counter it with bishop to f5. Captures, and now if bishop to c3, it will be a similar position to what happened in the game, but you don't want to make it easy for black. You want the black's light square bishop to stay on c8 and really hinder his development. So, after f4, bishop to c3 immediately by Caruana, the move he spent his first time on, and here Carlsen spent some 20 minutes and played bishop to f5. And here Carlsen was spending so long, and Caruana was blitzing out all of his moves, that by this time in the game, it's move 20, Caruana was already a whole hour up on the clock. So Carlsen was in serious time trouble here, and after Carlsen played bishop to f5, there was really no other way for white to make any progress but to push c5. And there was this whole argument over the entire internet whether c5 should be pushed, ideas like c5, and then if black captures immediately d6, and a lot of ideas were happening here. And obviously Caruana did feel that this was his moment to strike, as it was in this moment that Caruana actually took off his jacket, and you know, he really started the thinking, and it took him some 33 minutes to play his next move, and it is exactly why for example, Sese, the Norwegian supercomputer, didn't like bishop to f5, said that queen to c7 was in fact better, going after the c4 pawn and preventing c5. But okay, you know, that's just Sese. After bishop to f5, Caruana did play c5, and this is the strongest way to proceed. But like I said, it did take him some 33 minutes to play this. Because you have to take a lot of things into consideration. Like, if you push c5, can Carlsen actually push g4? What happens if he pushes g4? Bishop to e2, then f3 is coming. What happens now? G captures. We have g captures, and now after bishop captures, bishop to h3, is black actually having a mating attack here. Bishop blocks, bishop captures, king captures, and now it's very hard to continue the attack here. Rook captures, queen captures. Black simply doesn't have any pieces to attack with. The only rook black has is stuck on b8. Queen f8, you can simply capture on e5, and after pawn captures d6, and it's actually white that's much better and even winning this game. So Caruana calculates everything precisely, a c5 an excellent move, and Carlsen blitzes out knight captures on f3, so he was prepared for this. We have queen captures on f3, and now comes d captures on c5. And here, where everyone thought that, well, everyone, there was a lot of questioning going on, whether you want to bring this rook over to e1, whether we want to bring this rook over to e1. But the general consensus was that you want at least one rook on e1, as regardless of this bishop controlling this diagonal. Bringing a rook over to the e-file and making this nice rook lift to e6 would be very hard to defend in a practical game. For example, if rook 8 to e1, a move suggested by Sese, it would be very hard for black to actually play this. With the best defense, bishop to f6, h4, bishop captures, queen captures, and now you would have pawn captures on h4 and queen captures on c5. You would have this very nice passed pawn on d5, and it would be very dangerous. If this rook ever comes to e7, you can double up on the e-file and create all sorts of threats here. But without a perfect defense for black against this rook 8 to e1 move, for example, you play bishop to d6, and then ideas even like queen to h5 are possible. Rook to f7, and now even rook to e6, sacrificing the exchange, where you would never be able to capture this rook. White would just be able to double up or simply try increasing the pressure, because if you captures and pawn captures, then there's really no way to defend it. Rook to c7, only square where you can go to. Knight simply attacks it, and it's simply too much. There's no defense against knight to f6 check, which would force you to go over to the bishop's diagonal, and if you move the rook from the 7th rank, something like rook to c8, then even queen to f7, the immediate checkmate is available. So it would be very, very hard to defend against such a move, especially with such little time on the clock. But who knows, because up until this point, Carlsen was basically playing against an engine that Caruana's team, he basically faced lines that Caruana's team prepared using a supercomputer. So definitely strong player, Magnus Carlsen. And that's why I decided to use this title. I don't know, it seemed like an appropriate thing to do. But here Caruana actually played rook 8 to d1, and this was somewhat odd. Okay, you are threatening to push d6, but now Carlsen just immediately blocks it. And here, again, there's you're still better as white, of course. The rook is stuck here. Black doesn't really have all that many options, but if black gets a couple of moves in, like queen e8, queen g6, and manages to push g4, it will be very dangerous for white. So here a move that was again expected from Caruana, either getting this rook to e1 or the immediate queen to h5, would result in a couple of interesting positions. For example, bishop to g6, kicking the queen away, queen to h6, threatening checkmate already, rook to f7 blocking, and now rook f to e1. It was so crucial that there is at least one of the rooks on the e file. Bishop to f8, kicking the queen away, queen to h3, now kicking the queen further away, queen to h5, bishop to g6, but now queen to f3. And now, after you prevent d6, as you don't really want to allow d6, bishop to d6, now comes knight to c4, and after white eliminates this bishop, white will be the only player with a dark square bishop, and it will be simply too much. White will have so much control over the entire game. It would most likely be a winning attack for white. But here, to everyone's surprise, Caruana actually played h3. And as they've mentioned in the press conference after the game, Carlsen was super relieved when he saw this h3 move, as he immediately played queen to e8, and now it's actually white that has to be careful. If Carlsen manages to get queen g6 and g4 in, then black will start a very dangerous attack. So here, after some 12 minutes, Caruana decides that he cannot simply allow this. Knight to c4 is played, going after the dark square bishop, and now Carlsen must part with his dark square bishop. Queen g6, we have knight captures on d6, queen captures, and now, again, you don't want to allow black to consolidate with something like rook e8, and then perhaps even some ideas if you manage to get the pawns rolling on the king side. Again, it could be very dangerous for white. So here h4, deciding to remove the defender of the f4 pawn and going for a nice queen exchange. Bringing the rook over to the e file now is a bit too late, because black will simply counter your rook with his inactive rook, and now, I mean, the rooks are just getting off along the e file, and nothing is happening here. So Caruana tried h4. We have g captures on h4, queen captures on f4, queen captures, rook captures, and now a very nice move by Carlsen, h5, a beautiful move that basically says that if you capture my pawn here, I'm just gonna trap your rook, and not trap it in a sense that he will capture it anytime soon, but it will take this rook a very long time to actually re-enter the game. So after h5, we have rook back to rook to e1. And now comes bishop to g4, simply not allowing the rook to capture on h4 anymore, and offering a trade of rooks. Rook to f6, as the bishop is controlling the rook. Rook captures, bishop captures, and now king to f7. We have bishop to h4 capturing the pawn. Rook to e8, and now Caruana doesn't want to immediately go into the endgame of opposite colored bishops, but first rook to f1 check. We have king to g8, and now comes rook to f6. Here, Caruana wants to go after these pawns, but it's very unlikely. Carlsen goes for the active defense, rook to e2, We have rook g6 check, king to f8, and now comes even d6. Going after the pawns now doesn't really do all that much because you can simply prevent it. Bishop to c8, you defend the pawn, and if rook goes back, bishop goes back to g4, nothing is really happening here. There's no way to exploit these two weaknesses. And I don't know, if there's no way to exploit them, they aren't really weaknesses. So, after king to f8, d6, pushing the passed pawn, but now rook to d2. Carlsen simply puts his rook behind the passed pawn, as that's what you always want to do when there's a passed pawn. Here, you could actually blunder if you play something like king to f7 and attack the rook, because then white would have rook captures on g4. It would be very unfortunate for a game to end like this, because after pawn captures, d7 is coming. Notice that the bishop is controlling the d8 square, and now after you block it, you get a queen. Rook captures, bishop captures. This will simply be winning for white now. So, after rook to e2, sorry, after d6, rook to d2, now comes rook to g5, and it was in this position that the players agreed to a draw. On move 38, before even reaching time control, as now, okay, the c5 pawn is under attack, c4 rook attack set, captures, and now we basically have equal material on the board with opposite colored bishops, and there's not all that much you can do here to even try anything. Both of the players know this, so like we said, after rook to g5, they agreed to a draw, and game number 8 ends in the draw. The result is now 4-4. We have 4 more games to go before we reach faster time controls, so 4 more games in the classical. And I don't know, it seems Carlsen really dodged a very nice bullet here. But really, a huge congratulations to Carlsen, as like we said, up until move 20, up until this point where Caruana played bishop to c3, up until this point, Carlsen was basically down a whole hour on the clock, and basically he was playing against an engine. So now here, when really you should have unleashed creativity and go for something like rook to e1, there it simply wasn't possible. So again, we have this huge question: is it just trying to create winning chances straight out of the opening with preparations? Do the engines really kill your creativity? Is there no way around it? Simply, I see this game as a win for Magnus, because it's hard to actually look at it otherwise, but. I don't know. At least in game 10, if we see another Sicilian, I hope Carlsen will try the little c6, c5 joke. But yeah, how did you enjoy this game? How do you enjoy the championship so far? And what's your overall impression of the entire event? I would like to thank Adam Mead, Frank Lamar Jr., Leonardo De Queiroz, Viana Braga, Nils Lindberg, and Andrew McRae for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, hopefully with some more interesting games. And big announcement, Ivan Šarić of Croatia has just breached 2700 rating for the first time in his life. He's the first player from Croatia to ever achieve such a rating. It was in his game against Cheparinov, so big congratulations to him. I'll see if I manage, as tomorrow is a rest day, perhaps we can even see a very nice game from that event. So thank you all, and I will see you soon.